Welcome to episode number 13 of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. I'm Aric.
And I'm Angie.
We are married with a crap ton of kids.
So many kids. He has 3 and I have 3.
6 kids total. Our show is about blended, blessed, and our always a mess life. And our hope is if you find yourself in the same situation we're in, that by sharing our story, the fun, the challenges, it'll give you some inspiration, laughs, and community, knowing that you are not alone in this mess. That's a little bit, I guess, of a segue into what today is about. It's about when you feel alone and life is hard, and where do you go in those moments of, I don't know what to do?
Yes, the dreaded word of, should you go to therapy?
I think that means therapy would be the dreaded word. Angie and I have both done therapy, but we had different takes on it. So we'll talk about that. And just one of those things where it is one of those words that some people still today are like, oh, you go to therapy. Ooh.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell on myself a little bit, but I would definitely early in my life, I was one of those people that thought, it's better just to bury the pain and the emotions and paint this picture of perfection so everything looks great on the outside versus working through it and going to therapy. Because, therapy is really for messed up people, not for me, right? Because I've got it all together.
Yeah,
barely.
That's for somebody with a big problem.
Right, that's not me.
Yeah.
That's not me. That's for crazy people. But that's because I wasn't familiar with it, didn't know anything about it, and made my own assumptions based on literally zero experience with what therapy can actually do for you.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. Like, we all have preconceived notions of what therapy is going to be like. Some of that our society has put that on through TV shows and things like that over the years.
Laying on the couch and, expressing your feelings while someone just listens.
I feel like the first time I went in there, because I started going to therapy in like 2007 or 8, was like after my divorce and my dad dying, all that, I was a mess, right? So I go in there. I think I did lay down.
So you were messed up.
I think I did.
You probably did lay down.
I think I did lay
You're
down.
kind of dramatic.
This is supposed to be. And then I was like, this is uncomfortable.
I could see you being like, could you also give me a warm blanket and some milk and cookies?
Yeah. No, I didn't do all that. But the milk and cookies would have been a nice touch. If your therapist listening, maybe offer milk and cookies. But so I did therapy at that point for a while. And I definitely felt like I didn't get anything from that therapist, unfortunately. And so I do think that's one of the things you do kind of want to shop around until you find a fit in your therapist. And I'll talk later on about the guy that finally did the best work with me that has ever been done. And that's not saying that I'm perfect. I'm sure I could use more therapy. But, you got to a guy that called out your bullshit and helped you actually work through stuff rather than you come in and you just talk over about what your problems are and you're hoping they're going to give you some solutions. But again, in that regard, then you're not actually dealing with the core issue, which is a problem that you've maybe dealt with since childhood, right? So,
yeah, I would say for me, I never considered therapy until I went through my divorce. And I feel like that's a common thing that happens. Like you wait until you're at rock bottom or you're at the depths of, struggles. That's when you consider it versus like, what about considering it even when things are going okay, just to always keep yourself in check. But so for me, once I felt like I had a world of judgments on me and just heavy, heavy shoulders, someone that, a friend of mine that I trusted that also had went to therapy. So it helped normalize it a little bit for me of like, okay, well, she's not crazy and she went to therapy. So maybe it's okay for me. Like that was my thought process. So different now, but at the very beginning stages of realizing I probably need to talk to somebody, I thought, well, I'll try it, right?
Give it the old one too.
Could be good, could be bad. So I was lucky. The first person I went to, she was great. She's great. But, I kind of went in thinking she's going to help me solve my problem, right? Like,
that was my thought too. They're going to fix me.
Yeah. Like, okay, I'm going to tell her all this stuff and then it's going to be clear. But you do have to work through it. And they really aren't there to tell you exactly what to do. It's more to work through your emotions, your feelings, ask questions, but to get you to kind of develop your own tools and get that clarity. I feel like a lot of times people go to therapy because it's super foggy, right? And you're unsure. And so it's valuable to talk to a professional to help you work through your thoughts, right? Because your mind can play a lot of tricks on you, for sure, unless you can find that sounding board.
Do you always say the stories you're telling yourself?
Oh, no, it's
stop
totally.
listening to the stories you're telling yourself.
Totally.
And I think that's 100% accurate. So that if you're able to find a therapist that you're able to connect with, and you're sharing some of those stories you're telling yourself, they can debunk the true ones from the not so true ones. In my experience, seeing multiple therapists over the years, it sounds like I'm totally crazy saying I have multiple therapists, right? But I do think you have to search until you find one that's actually making progress. And some of that is you finally being open and honest with yourself and what you're really struggling with so that you can get to the bottom of some of those things.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do think, for me, I think you tend to try to tell yourself a certain story rather than actually digging deep to feel whatever you experience. Because let's be honest, life is hard. And everybody at some point in their life are going to go through pain, heartache, suffering, all of that, whether it's, death of your father or, just people are not perfect. People are not perfect. So you're going to have pain in your life. And so you have to be able to work through that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biblical principle, right? Is God created this world, Adam and Eve, and then sin came into the world, and ever since then, it's not been perfect. And so we're always going to deal with that because the world's no longer perfect. And then when you get into a marriage, you've got two imperfect people trying to live together. That's hard. And then you add in two families, and now you've got multiple. You've got kids, and maybe there's ex-spouses and new family members all around. Now you've got all these imperfect people, and you're trying to spin it all together and make it all work. And so sometimes that's going to be more challenging and heavy than other times. And so it's good to stay grounded and rooted. Sometimes that means therapy.
Yeah. There's a lot of other tools out there too, not just therapists. Everyone has friends, right? And so all of us, you vent and share with your friends. So that's a great coping mechanism. But I also think there is beauty in sharing your story with someone that doesn't know you, doesn't know your story, right? That was one thing I really valued when I went to a therapist was she didn't know me, right? And so just being able to talk through your story with someone who has zero judgments and is really truly there to help you work through it it's so helpful. But then there's a lot of information out there too, books to read that are great tools as well. Recently, our friend Lynn Roush through the Crossing Church, she's at LPC, she wrote a blog series called Between Two Identities, and it's out there on the crossingchurch.com. You can also go to crossingcounseling.com. But it's a great like journey through your emotions. So like some of her topics are discovering who you are according to God's story, which at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want to know?
Yeah, like who am I? We want to be heard and felt and know that other people see us for what we want to be seen. And really that's back to like God's story. When we start to see ourselves as part of a bigger story, then that's helpful. But we don't know, right? That's why I always felt lost is like, well, who am I? Where am I going?
Right.
What am I doing?
I think that question only comes up when you're struggling. Like if everything's going great, you kind of feel like, well, this is who I am. Like this is great. And I feel like whenever you start struggling, then it's like, oh my gosh, who am I? Is this supposed to be who I am? Or am I supposed to be somebody else? Like, I feel like that is that first initial question that comes up when things get tough. So it's like the first one. Then she kind of goes into starting your self exploration at the beginning, which means your childhood, which I think is a great point. We just mentioned this earlier, like people are not perfect. Parents are not perfect. We are not perfect parents. And so a lot of times some of your experiences and emotions, pain, all that starts when you're a child. And so she kind of walks through like children need to be seen, safe, soothed, and secure. And so there is some point in your childhood that one of those is not met, right?
Well,
so that shapes who you are. So when you are struggling, you do kind of have to go back. And we all do this. I do this. Like when I think about, a challenge I have, I immediately almost go back to like, why do I think that? Right. And you have to kind of go back to your childhood. So I think that's super interesting to focus in on that too, as part of your figuring out who you are.
And when I finally found like a therapist that I really enjoyed being with, his name was John. He also worked with Lynn at the Crossing, and he really helped me work through those emotions and took me way back into the pain, which is, sometimes when you're not getting anywhere in therapy, it's because you're still not going through the pain. You don't want to go back to those times. And I've had this conversation with my mom since then, because my dad's been gone a long time. But as a child, man, I wish I could have gotten a lot more things from my mom and dad. And that's not saying I thought I had great parents. I still believe that. You have great parents. When you're our age, in your 40s, there's probably like that span where you're like, I don't know, 30 to 50, something like that, where your parents, they just raised you differently back then. Like they worked, right? And they weren't raised to hug all the time and say, I love you all the time. That's more of a thing that has happened in the last 20 plus years, probably, where parents are starting to shift that direction. And so I had really struggled with the fact that, I wish that my mom and dad had been more, they would show up my games and they were good parents. I just realized later in life that I needed more of an emotional connection with my mom and dad at an earlier age. And I think we try to do that with our kids. Now, again, that's not blaming our parents or anybody.
No, because they didn't have any tools either. Guidance. Like there was no blog post out here to, for them to read on parenting.
They couldn't Google it.
I Google a lot. Like if I feel like I'm struggling from a parenting thing and perspective and I'm trying to figure something out, I immediately go Google and there's, hundreds of things that come up that I could go read.
Yeah.
So we have more tools. We have the advantage now.
Yes, I'm very clear. My mom listens sometimes. I'm not saying I had a bad childhood. I'm not saying that, any of us did. I'm just saying it was different. And so as we continue to grow and we have more tools like the blog series that we've been reading from Lynn, like the fact that we've done therapy, we just have more tools in how to do it and try to make sure that we are seeing and hearing each other as a couple in a blended family. But we're also seeing and hearing our children for who they want to be in this blended family, and hopeful that, that's just kind of what this episode is about, is making sure that we're hearing each other.
A couple other topics that she has out there as well is recognizing the real enemy. And then there's another one on healing trauma and restoring wholeness, which is I think a good one to read. And then the last one is letting go and trusting God, which I probably need to read that one every day. It's so hard to let go. It's so hard to let go and just trust because, I think a lot of this, my struggle, I think with initially going to therapy, before that was like, well, I can fix it. Like I can just work through it, right? I'm in control. And even to just decide to go to therapy or talk to someone, you have to let go. You have to be like, okay, I can't do this. And I think kind of switching and diving into why people avoid it, that's one of them. Is like, then that means you're weak and you don't have it together. Like for me. So I think everybody's personality is a little bit different, but I do think there's a lot of people that avoid it because then it makes them feel like they don't have it together and it's hard to let go. But oh my gosh, it's such a great pivot point. There's a vulnerability in it and a weakness in it that's when I think you can have real growth, is when you can let go of that.
Well, because you're doing what now is an incredibly Christian thing. You're letting other people love you and serve you and care for you, which is what we're supposed to be doing for each other. But recognizing who the real enemy is. I mean, the enemy wants you to think you're alone and that you're not worthy. And then all the struggles you're going through, maybe you have a fault in those. And maybe some of it is your own problem. But
sure.
But it's also when you go to see someone, now you're taking the steps to try to solve some of those issues. For us, therapy has been a good situation. Now, we've never done therapy together. I'm not saying that we won't someday. I would almost expect that someday we would have to do therapy together.
I would want to. Like this is my whole point earlier. Why wait till things are really, really challenging? A lot of it, I think, it's a communication tool, right? And so, is
this the episode where we decide to go together?
Stay tuned. No, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's a checkpoint. Yeah. It's a checkpoint, and life's hard. Like just because, we're newlyweds and we have all this like excitement happening does not mean shit's not going to be hard,
It's like
right?
an oil change in your car. You got to do it every so
Yes.
often to make sure everything's
Why
running
wait
good.
till your vehicle runs out of oil?
Yeah.
Like, that's dumb. So why don't you just have a scheduled maintenance? Like, it's a maintenance check. How are we doing?
It's a once a month therapy appointment. Just it's your maintenance check,
Yeah.
and that's where you're. I like that, because you're right. When you do get
Change the mindset. Like, why wait until completely struggling? And
because then your heart is already hardened.
Yes.
And that makes it so much harder in a couples therapy situation. But, for anybody, really. I mean, Hallie mentioned a few weeks ago that she goes to therapy. She likes it. So it may be that your kids, want to go because they can see in themselves there's stuff that they want to deal with and fix. And I think that's a real area of growth as we watch our kids. If they want to do that, there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just encouraging them.
I encourage them, right? It's a development of who they are. Because I do think, again, back to the point earlier, I think when kids get in their 1920s, early, I think in this world, especially with all the social media, like we didn't grow up in this age, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so I think it's even harder for them to ask that question of who am I, especially as they're getting out on their own. I mean, I think everybody should get a level of support and tools to navigate life because it is hard.
I have a feeling that we need more doctors in the world today. We need more therapists in the world today because that is a great area of, I know how hard it is to get into any good therapist, to see our friend Lynn or anybody like that. And so to have a good therapist, we're going to be short on those in the world that we live in, especially with everything that's gone on in the pandemic over the last couple of years. Kids still trying to navigate that, parents trying to navigate that. We're going to need more therapists.
Well, nobody teaches kids to work through their emotions. There's no classes in school. I mean, there's this whole emotional intelligence side of us as humans that there's nothing out there. Now, there's some books now, right? And there's some articles about how you can learn emotional intelligence. It's not like IQ where you're born with that. It's something you can learn, but how are kids learning this? I didn't learn it, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a lot of value in.
I would say the other hard thing right now is, and we can see this sometimes in our own home, is that kids are in their phone or their games too much. And when we were a kid, we didn't have all those things. So you did have to kind of pay attention to what the other people around you were doing. That's kind of how you got some of your emotional intelligence. Well, when you're always in your phone, I mean, you're not gathering. And that's where I'm talking about that as a societal thing, right? You can see people that are on their phone all the time. They don't want to interact with other human beings. That makes the emotional intelligence side even harder. So I think it's.
But then on the flip side, we're wired for communication and connection.
Yes.
So if we're missing that, then we are all going to struggle emotionally because while we're focusing on our phones, we still also need that connection. And then there's this huge gap. So I think it's super, super important to make sure that we're all developing the tools to just navigate life. But, another reason I think people avoid digging deep into their emotions is a lot of times they think, well, whatever happens in the past, it's in the past. So I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to plow ahead.
That's trauma.
But we are who we are because of our experiences. So if we don't go back and work through that, I don't think you're ever going to be able to truly be who you're meant to be unless you deal with it. So I think that's another component. People try to just avoid working through it because it's like easy just to brush it under the rug and try to move on from it. But one of the quotes Lynn had in her blog post was, engage in the past so then you can live in the present. And I love that line because I think that's so true. And I think a lot of people maybe don't recognize that. Like I didn't when I was younger. I didn't think about it in that way of like, I got to heal from the past and to truly be present. Otherwise, you're always looking in the rearview mirror. You're always thinking about, well, if that didn't happen, that wouldn't happen to me. I wouldn't be in this situation versus healing from it and then truly being able to move on.
I know I lived a good 7, 8, maybe years of my life just mad and I wouldn't talk or think about my dad after he died because I just wanted to bury that, which was a real shame because there was, 27 years of a lot of good things, especially the last 7 to 10 years my dad was alive, we had gotten really close as buddies, right? Because I was older, and so I just buried all that. And it wasn't until I started to unpack those feelings and to just be able to talk about him and remember those feelings that I started to make progress then into being a better father myself, right? Because, you can't go back and unpack things that you liked and didn't like about your dad when you're just trying to forget that he existed, which is so dumb. When you say that, it doesn't even make sense. But in my mind, from like 27 to about 35, something like that, that was my coping mechanism with his death was don't think about him. Don't talk about the memories. Don't look at the pictures. Don't do any of that. And so that quote is so good. You have to engage in that past so that you can live in the present and become a better husband, father, friend, all the things that you want to be by going through the pain.
Yeah.
It is going to suck for a hot minute. But I would say this, if people don't think about it this way, yeah, it sucks for a hot minute. And then when you're through that pain, which is going to be a different cycle for everyone, now you can live a freer, better, happier life. And that's the problem that so many of us miss, is we're too afraid to go through that pain to get to the better, happy story.
Yeah, it's so true. I think another, and this was true for me, another reason people avoid it is that, and this might be more of a female thing than a male thing, I'm not sure, but that it feels selfish to be focused on yourself when so many other people need you. Even going through divorce, I had someone say it's so selfish of you, right? And that's stung. But I think that it is so important for you to focus on yourself and be able to reflect and work through that. Now, that doesn't mean you leave everybody else hanging, right? There's a balance, but for you to be whole, you have to be able to work through your challenges. And when you do that, though, and you work through that, then it allows you to empathize with others. And you can see it, right? You can see other people that maybe are still at that stage in their life where they are avoiding therapy. And it's cringy a little bit because you're like, oh my gosh, if they would just open up and be able to work through their challenges, they would be a completely different person. But I remember having this conversation with my therapist around the selfish part because I really struggle with that. I struggle with really thinking about who I was, right? To have that ability, because I really did not do that until I went to therapy, until I was going through a divorce, where it was like the first time in my life I felt like I asked myself that question of who am I and what do I actually want to be? I literally never had thought about that because I was so outward focused on everybody else. But I'm gonna read this poem because I will never forget her taking it off of her bulletin board. And she's like, you need to read this. And I read it and it was like, oh my gosh, it just changed my perspective. It doesn't mean that you don't think about other people, but it means it's okay for you to take a little bit of time and work through and focus on yourself. Did you want to say something before I read it?
I want to let you read it before I say anything. I want to hear the poem because you've not shared this with me.
No.
So I don't want to make any comments until I hear the poem. I'm interested.
Okay. So it's called The Journey by Mary Oliver. So, all right, here we go. One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice, though the whole house began to tremble and you felt the old tug at your ankles. Mend my life, each voice cried, but you didn't stop. You knew what you had to do. Through the wind pried with its stiff fingers at the very foundations. Though their melancholy was terrible, it was already late enough, and a wild night, and the road full of fallen branches and stones. But little by little, as you left their voice behind, the stars began to burn through the sheets of clouds, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company as you strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do, determined to save the only life that you could save. That's it.
We talked a couple weeks ago when Hallie was in here about the two of you don't cry. Did you cry when she read that?
Oh, I mean, I cried at every therapy session because I was at such a struggling point in my life of figuring out who I was, right? Like we've talked about that. Divorce completely uproots everything. And for me, I had painted this picture of perfection my whole life of like what it looks like on the outside, not on the inside. And then you go through something like that. And then it's like, you feel like the whole world's going, huh, yeah, okay. You're not who I thought you were. Right. And so it is just for someone that paints that picture, it just tears you up. Right. And then it's like, oh my God. But it was such an opportunity though, to sort of reset everything. And when she gave this to me to read, it was like, oh my God, I have always been thinking about everybody else and fixing their life that I never stopped to like go, hang on, is this, where? And then it was like, so I do say this a lot with people on my team in different times. I've shared this, I don't know how many times to other women, because I think for us, we're always we're wired to think we have to take care of everybody else. And so we do hashtag save yourself a lot because we don't think about, and I know it at a high level that sounds selfish, but like for a lot of women, we are so not selfish that we think about everybody else that sometimes we forget about filling our own cup, right? And so it's hard to give to others when you're not whole yourself. Yeah. So anyway, it just it was like, oh my gosh. And I've always saved this, and every once in a while I'll reread it because it was so impactful.
No, I think that's really good. That's why I wanted to hear what it was before I comment on it, because it really actually enlightens me a lot into your journey of recovery after your divorce, right? And I do think, I tell people all the time, and people that know you always say you're like the kindest, most giving person, in that respect, like you're always giving. You're always giving. But you still have to take care of yourself, right? And so a lot of times people go, oh, that's a selfish person. They're just taking care of themselves. And I think that you have to do both, right? You have to be able to heal what's going on inside of you. Otherwise, you can't actually give all the things that you're giving to everyone else. They should work together in some kind of harmony. And then that allows you to really be who you want to be all around, is that you're able to give. Because that's really what you love, is to give to other people. It's just hard for anyone to do that when you're consistently drained and not replenishing the tank. It's like getting the oil changed again, right? Like continue to do that. So
yeah, I think if you find yourself in the situation where you're scared of it, or you're thinking about maybe reaching out to a counselor, I'd say go for it. What's the worst thing that can happen, right? And so sometimes you might meet with someone and figure out, oh, they're maybe not a good fit. There are so many different types of therapists out there. But it's worth it if you find the right one to just work through your emotions, because life is hard. Life's complicated. Everyone is imperfect, right? And so there's going to be pain and heartache to work through. But don't spend time avoiding it versus diving in.
I really heard today that, like, was if you think at some point, like as a couple, like do therapy when you're in a good spot, like you and I are in, so that we're not waiting until there's hardened hearts and people are upset, because through years and years of marriage, which we know, things get hard. And when your heart is hardened, that makes it harder to go through. If you are in a blended family, it's okay if your kids want to go to therapy. That's growth. That's a good thing that they want to work through things that are bothering them to get to the other side, especially if you're fresh into a divorce. Your kids are struggling and dealing with a lot of things at that point in time. So I think that's good if that's what your kids want to do. And then I think we also learned that we probably need more counselors. There probably needs to be more counselors coming up through the world, because that's going to be incredibly important over the next several years. And then just again, if maybe you're not there yet, but the good news is there are resources out there, like our friends at The Crossing here in Columbia. You can go to thecrossingchurch.com and check out the blogs as maybe just like little things to help you along the way if you're not ready for counseling. That's the great thing about the internet, is you could be listening in Pennsylvania, but you could still find a resource here in Missouri.
We'll also post on our website at Blended Blessed, Always a Mess, the links to the articles that we referenced in those blog posts, because they're a great read. And there's a lot of other resources out there too. They've got books that they recommend reading as well. So we'll post that information.
Maybe we'll have Len on someday.
She would be great.
She would be good. All right. That is it for this week's episode of Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess. Be sure to help yourself when you need it.
Oh my God. Save yourself.
Save yourself. Hashtag save yourself. Hashtag help yourself. Here we go.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we're going to go now.
Have a great week. We will talk to you next time on Blended, Blessed, and Always a Mess.